Bodh Gaya. Then being a quester for the good, searching for the incomparable, matchless path of peace, while walking on tour through Magadha one arrived at Yeruvala, the army township. There I saw a beautiful stretch of ground, a lovely woodland grove, a clear flowing river with a beautiful ford with a village nearby for support. And I thought, indeed, this is a good place for a young man set on striving. So one sat down there, thinking, indeed, this is a good place for striving. 1. In 528 BCE, after 6 years of learning under different teachers and experimenting with self-mortification, Prince Siddhattha arrived on the outskirts of the small village of Yeruvala in Magadha. Like most Indian villages even today, Yeruvala had a tree shrine at which people would worship in the hope of having their wishes fulfilled, and it was under this tree that Prince Siddhattha sat and began his meditation. He probably chose this particular locality because, unlike the fearful forests where he had lived in the recent past, the environment around Yeruvala was sylvan and non-threatening. And he probably chose to meditate at the foot of this particular tree because he knew that, sooner or later, someone would come to worship, see him, and probably bring him food. The Jatakas describe the Bodhimanda, the area around the Bodhi tree, prior to the Buddha's enlightenment as being a smooth area of silver sand without a blade of grass growing on it and with all the surrounding trees and flowering shrubs bending, as if in homage, towards the Bodhi tree. 2. As he sat meditating, his mind disciplined and purified by years, even lifetimes, of practicing the perfections, he exerted himself one final time to overcome the last traces of doubt, ignorance, and desire. The striving sutta from the Sutta Nipata and many later Buddhist literary works describe this final struggle allegorically as a battle against Mara, the personification of evil. 3. Having defeated Mara and his army, the highest wisdom arose in his mind and Prince Siddhattha became the Buddha, the fully enlightened one. The Buddha spent the next 7 weeks in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree experiencing the joy of enlightenment and contemplating the implications of the truths he had realized, after which he set off for Sarnath. He returned later that year and converted 3 eminent ascetics who lived in the area, Gaya Kassapa, Nadi Kassapa, and Yeruvala Kassapa. For, after that, he set out to proclaim his Dhamma to the world, apparently never to return to Yeruvala again. According to the Pali commentators, Yeruvala took its name from the large amount of sand, veil, in the area. However, so momentous was the event that took place here that this name was soon discarded, replaced by several other names evocative of that event. Speaking of his pilgrimage to the place in 260 BC, King Asoka says light went to Sambodhi, Ayaya Sambadim. In later times, it was known as Mahabodhi, Bodhimanda, or simply Vajrasana, Diamond Throne, while the name Bodh Gaya seems to have been used for the first time in about the 18th century. Probably simply to distinguish the place from Gaya, which was sometimes called Brahma Gaya. The first shrine at Bodh Gaya may have consisted of the Bodhi tree with a stone slab at its foot surrounded by a wooden railing. Tradition ascribes the first substantial temple to King Asoka, and although there is no definite evidence to support this tradition, there is every reason to suppose that a devout Buddhist like Asoka would have built a temple at such a sacred place. A relief from the railing of the Barhut Stupa and dating from about 100 BCE gives a good idea of what this early temple at Bodh Gaya looked like. A 2-storied structure with a gabled roof is built around the Bodhi tree and is supported by polygonal pillars. Inside, a slab of stone, the Vajrasana, can be seen with the decorated trunk of the Bodhi tree and 2 Tiratana symbols behind it. The Vajrasana has flowers strewn on it which 2 devotees have just offered, and umbrella projects from the Bodhi tree, while garlands are suspended from its branches. 2 more worshippers whistle and wave their shawls, and above them 2 devas join in the devotions, the one on the left by throwing blossoms and the one on the right by offering a garland. Around the temple is a railing and just beyond it a pillar with an elephant capital erected by King Asoka. This temple, which seems to have been called Vajrasana Ganhakuti, may have stood for several centuries, being repaired and added to from time to time. Much of the history of Bodh Gaya is known from inscriptions made by donors, graffiti and, to a lesser extent, literary accounts of the many pilgrims who visited throughout the centuries. These written records tell us as much about the pilgrims themselves as they do about the place. Many pilgrims came alone, one at least seems to have come with his wife and child, sometimes groups of friends traveled together, others came alone from distant lands only to meet a fellow countryman when they arrived. There were proud princes who made lavish offerings, and in one case at least, a humble monk who mentions that due to a shortage of funds, he could not make offerings in the way he would have liked. Almost all those who built shrines, donated statues, or performed pujas did so expressing the deep desire that their act of devotion would benefit themselves and all others. After the building of the first proper temple, the next major construction at Bodh Gaya was the stone railing, probably replacing an earlier wooden one, erected in about 100 BCE. This extensively decorated structure, parts of which can still be seen in the museum, was the gift of a group of ladies from the courts of King Indragnimitra and King Brahmamitra. Perhaps 50 or a. 100 years later, one Bodhirakshita of Sri Lanka donated a crossbar for the railing, apparently to replace the one which had been broken. He is the first pilgrim we know of to have come to Bodh Gaya from beyond India. During the Kusana period, the first Buddha statues were set up at Bodh Gaya. Several of these were quite large, from 3 to 4 meters high, and judging from the fine pink sandstone from which they were made and from their style, they were probably manufactured at Madura. In 383 CE, a monk and one of his female supporters donated 2 statues, one of the Buddha and another of the Bodhisattva, the first of which has the donor's inscription on it. The inscription reads, "In the year 64, on the 5th day of the 3rd month, during the reign of the great king Trikamala, just prior to this, the monk who was an upholder of the Vinaya set up by his own strength stone images of the Buddha and Bodhisattva, both with lion pedestals. With the aid of the Buddhist laywoman who was a helper in this noble act of piety, was done by the teacher of Dhamma. Let the merit springing from this act of piety be shared by mother and father, beginning with the preceptor." In the 4th century CE, the king of Sri Lanka, Sri Meghavana, 304 to 332 CE, had a monastery built at Bodh Gaya which in time came to have control over the running of the Mahabodhi Temple. Huyen Tsiang saw this monastery 300 years later and described it thus. "Outside the northern gate of the wall of the Bodhi Tree is the Mahabodhi Monastery. It was built by a former king of Samala. This edifice has 6 halls with towers 3 stories high, and a wall of defense 30 or 40 feet high surrounds it. The utmost skill of the artist has been employed, the ornamentation is of the richest colors. The statue of the Buddha is cast in gold and silver, and is decorated with gems and precious stones. The stupas are high and large in proportion and beautifully ornamented, they contain relics of the Buddha." Huyen Tsiang tells us that the king built this monastery after his brother, who was a monk, went on a pilgrimage to India and found it difficult to get accommodation in the Indian temples. He also tells us that an inscription set up in the monastery read, "To help all without distinction is the highest teachings of all the Buddhas." This Sri Lankan monastery was still functioning in the 13th century when Dharmasvaman visited, and its policy of offering hospitality to all seems to have been maintained. The Mahabodhi Monastery was directly north of the temple and now lies under the large mound that extends from the Mahant's palace to the back of the Mahabodhi Society rest house and the Tibetan temple. The main building of the monastery was excavated by Cunningham and Beglar in 1885. It was found to be a huge structure, 15 meters square with walls 3 meters thick, towers on the 4 corners and a pillared courtyard in the middle. A drain led from the courtyard to the outer walls and ended in a richly carved makara which was in the museum but stolen several years ago. Surrounding the monastery and about 92 meters from it, was a huge wall with 16 towers. The stairs leading to the Mahabodhi Temple on the north side and the wall with arched niches beside it were a part of the outermost wall of this great monastery and are the only traces of it that can still be seen. It was soon after the introduction of Buddhism into Vietnam in the 6th century that the first pilgrims from that region began visiting India. Two monks named Kui Sung and Min Vien took a ship via Sri Lanka to a port on the west coast of India and then went by foot to the Middle Land. After visiting Bodh Gaya, the two companions headed for Rajagaha, after which Kui Sung became sick and died. He was only 25 years old. Exactly who built the present Mahabodhi Temple, and when, is something of a mystery. Fan did not mention seeing any temple during his visit to Bodh Gaya at the beginning of the 4th century CE, but it was there, substantially the same as it is today, when Huyen Tsiang came early in the 7th century. It was probably built in the first half of the 4th century. Huyen Tsiang says that two brothers built the temple in fulfillment of a vow, but it would seem that the resources needed for the building of a structure so large would only be available to a king. Either way, no donor's inscription related to the building of the temple has ever been found. Huyen Tsiang describes the temple as it existed at his time thus. To the east of the Bodhi Tree, there is a temple about 160 or 170 feet high. Its lower foundation wall is 20 or more paces wide in front. The building is of blue bricks covered with plaster. All the niches in the different stories hold golden figures. The four sides of the building are covered with wonderful ornamental work, in one place figures of string pearls, in another, figures of heavenly beings. The whole is surrounded by a gilded copper amulika fruit. The eastern face adjoins a storied pavilion, the projecting eaves of which rise, one over the other, to the height of 3 distinct chambers. Its projecting eaves, its pillars, beams, doors and windows are decorated with gold and silver ornamental work, with pearls and gems let in to fill up interstices. Its somber chambers and mysterious halls have doors in each of the 3 stories. To the right and left of the outside gate are niche-like chambers. In the left is a figure of Avalokitesvara and in the right a figure of Maitreya. They are made of white silver and are about 10 feet high. The Gupta period saw the construction of a number of smaller shrines in the precincts around the Mahabodhi Temple. Judging by the donors' inscriptions referring to the erection of these shrines, many of them must have been beautifully adorned, although today only their foundations remain. One such inscription, found on the pedestal of a Buddha statue which must have originally been a part of one of the aforementioned shrines, reads, "This most ornamental, excellent and lofty temple was constructed by Bodhisena, a pure-minded monk, delighting in the way of perfect wisdom and an inhabitant of Datgala, for the sage, he who was compassionate to all beings and who defeated Mara, for the untying of the fetters of the world, for his parents, relations, teachers and all the inhabitants of Ahavagra." In 588 CE, a monk called Mahanama came from Sri Lanka and built a shrine with a Buddha statue, the remains of which can still be seen near the northern staircase leading to the temple. In the inscription which was found in the shrine, Mahanama names the great teacher whose lineage he was a part of, and then proceeds to describe the shrine he had built and his altruistic motives in doing so. The teacher's, disciple greater still, he whose excellent name is Mahanama, an inhabitant of Amradvipa, a very ocean of a mighty family, born in the island of Lanka, delighting in the welfare of others, by him this beautiful shrine of the teacher of mankind who overcame the power of Mara, dazzling white as the rays of the moon, with an open pavilion on all sides, has been caused to be built at the exalted Bodhimanda. By means of this appropriate action, may mankind, freed from attachment to worldly things, having dispelled mental darkness, and like a beacon, having no clinging, enjoy the supreme happiness of perfect wisdom. As long as the sun, the dispeller of darkness, shines in all directions with diffused rays, as long as the ocean full to its boundaries with waves that are curved like the hoods of cobras, and as long as Mount Sumeru, the abode of Indra, has its summit made beautiful by diverse jeweled slabs so as to be full of luster, so long let the shrine of the great saint be everlasting. The year 269 on the 7th day of the bright fortnight in the month of Kaitra. This inscription, written in Sanskrit, can now be seen in the Indian Museum, Kolkata. The statue that Mahanama had placed in the shrine has also been found, as has another statue donated by two Sri Lankan monks, Dharmagupta and Dharmatrasena, who are thought to have accompanied Mahanama on his pilgrimage. 100 or perhaps 200 years after Mahanama, another Sri Lankan, this time a layman named Udayasri, set up a Buddha statue at Bodh Gaya and honored it as he would the Lord. On the pedestal of this statue is a kneeling figure holding a garland, probably Udayasri, and figures of a woman and a boy, perhaps Udayasri's family. Dating from about the same time is an inscription written on the railing around the temple by yet another Sri Lankan pilgrim, Anagarika. This devout monk not only built a shrine, he repaired the Mahabodhi Temple and made provision to have a lamp burned perpetually within it, made practical gifts to the Sangha, and performed a puja for the peace of the world. The inscription, parts of which are damaged, is written on two separate stones of the railing. The first part reads, "The virtuous monk, Anagarika, being a descendant of the rulers of the island of Lanka, is like a moon in the firmament of his family. This monk, through devotion, wishing to attain Buddhahood, caused to be performed acts of worship at the shrine of 3 jewels for the peace of all humankind. Whatever merit has been acquired by me through this act, let it be for the enlightenment of. Let that very auspicious reward be shared by." The second part reads, "A shrine has been built where the great Vajrasana temple is. The temple itself has been adorned with a new coating of plaster and paint at a cost of 250 dinaras. And in the temple, a lamp of ghee has been provided for Lord Buddha from the income derived from the gift of 100 cows, for as long as the moon, the sun, and the stars shall endure. Also from the income of another 100 cows the cost of small perpetually recurring repairs to the temple and the cost of providing another lamp of ghee to be burnt daily before the image inside the temple, has been met. From the income of. Yet, another 100 cows provision has been made for having a lamp of ghee burned before the brass image of Lord Buddha in the Sri Lankan monastery. A perpetual endowment of a lamp of ghee has been made for the benefit of the monastery. There also a large water reservoir has been dug for the use of the noble congregation of monks, and to the east of it a new field has been laid out. Whatever merit may have been acquired by me from all this, may it be for the benefit of my parents at first." This inscription is now in the Indian Museum in Kolkata. During the long reign of the Pala kings of Bengal, the Mahabodhi Temple received lavish patronage. In fact, most of the statues and stupas that can still be seen in and around the temple date from this period. Several inscriptions mention Pala kings as having made gifts and endowments as did kings from other parts of India. King Sri Purnabhadra of the Sindh built a temple with 3 images and King Tunga of Rashtrakuta erected a temple like unto a flight of steps into heaven. The Pala period also saw a flood of pilgrims coming from China. In an inscription dating from about 1000 CE, the monk Shii tells us he had vowed to exhort 30,000 people to prepare themselves by their conduct to be reborn in the heaven realm, and to this end he distributed 30,000 Dharma books. He says he then traveled to India with 3 other monks to see the Vajrasana and again vowed to continue his travels until he had visited all the sacred places. This inscription was found carved on a block of stone below a row of 7 standing Buddhas and 1 Maitreya, all with different hand gestures. In 1011, the great Bengali teacher Atissa, who was later to play a crucial role in the resurgence of Buddhism in Tibet, took his higher ordination at one of Bodh Gaya's monasteries. Around this time also, the famous Tibetan translator, Rinchen Sangpa, 958-1051, came to Bodh Gaya to complete the studies he had began in Kashmir. His biographer tells us that he made offerings at the northern gate that led to the Mahabodhi Temple. All this suggests that Bodh Gaya was an important center for learning and scholarship as much as for pilgrimage. In 1021, another party of intrepid Chinese monks arrived in Bodh Gaya and set up monuments to commemorate their visits. One of them, Yum Shu, composed a long devotional poem in praise of the Buddha and had it inscribed on a large stone tablet. The first part of the inscription reads, "I, Yumshu, having come from my distant homeland to gaze upon the land of the Buddha and then having seen with my own eyes the miraculous footprint, Was I not respectfully to offer my homage and glorification of my teacher? I therefore collected together what money I could spare, and some 30 paces north from the Bodhi Tree I raised a stone to the 10,000 Buddhas. After the poem, Yumshu adds a postscript. There went with me to worship in the land of the Buddha the 2 monks, Iching and Ion, from the monastery of the established doctrine in the main street of the eastern capital, who each took with him a gold-embroidered robe to be placed on the shrine of Mahabodhi, and each set up his own memorial tablet in perpetual memory thereof. This interesting inscription and the other one set up by Yumshu's companions are both now in the Indian Museum, Kolkata. Only a year after Yumshu and his fellow monks were in Bodh Gaya, another Chinese pilgrim arrived. This monk, named Ho Yun, carved a stupa out of stone and placed it 30 paces north of the Bodhi tree. He also said he wished to inscribe an entire sacred scripture on stone, but as he was short of funds he was unable to do so. Whether these and the several other Chinese monks who visited Bodh Gaya around this time survived the long and dangerous journey back to their homeland has not been recorded. They are known to history only because of their acts of faith. According to Tibetan sources, the teacher and administrator Isab's son went to Bodh Gaya in about 1030 to get a statue which he brought back to Tibet with him and enshrined in the famous Shalu temple. The year 1098 saw the beginning of what was to be a long relationship between the Buddhists of Burma and Bodh Gaya. By that time the Mahabodhi Temple was at least 600 years old and was apparently in need of major repairs. Either on his own initiative or at the request of others, King Kyanzitha sent a mission to the Middle Land to carry out these repairs, the details of which are recorded in an inscription at the Shwesindo Pagoda in Prome. The king gathered together gems of diverse kinds and sent them in a ship to repair the holy temple at Bodh Gaya and to offer lights which should burn forever and ever. 3 inscriptions dating from the last half of the 12th century indicate that considerable building actively took place at this time under the auspices of King Asoka of Sawalik, in western Nepal. The first of these inscriptions records the gift made by Prince Dasaratha, a younger brother of King Asoka, a follower of the excellent Mahayana school, a true devotee and a lamp amongst the assembly of nobles. The second inscription records the building of a shrine to the Buddha graceful and like a hall of emancipation and bliss by one of King Asokavala's feudatory chiefs. The inscription also states that the Buddha's dispensation is in decay and that it was written in a great hurry by Indra Nandi, a writer of great fame, and carved on stone by the engraver Rama. The third and largest inscription was found built into the wall of a temple in Gaya, although it must have originally been set up at Bodh Gaya. It records that Asoka, at the request of his Kashmiri teacher, built a shrine at Bodh Gaya and arranged to have offerings made regularly at the shrine. The beginning of the 13th century saw much of the Middle Land in turmoil due to its invasion by the Muslims. Of course, armies had been marching back and forth throughout the northern plains for centuries, and although the more richly endowed Hindu or Buddhist temples were sometimes looted by undisciplined soldiers or kings desperate for funds to carry on their campaigns, this was the exception. But the marauding soldiers who now appeared were different from those who had come before. They destroyed temples, defaced statues and murdered monks and priests not for loot but out of a fierce religious jealousy incomprehensible to most Indians. However, for the time being, Bodh Gaya escaped the destruction that befell so many other places, and although dark rumors were in the air, life continued as before. The last we hear of the community of Sri Lankan monks who looked after the Mahabodhi Temple is an inscription from around this time, the year 1262 CE. It reads, Hail! Majestic is the shade of the Bodhi tree, ancient, giver of great enlightenment to the victors and which is the stay of those who are on the path to perfect enlightenment. This village of Katihala in Satagata, its lands, water, together with the plough tax is granted by charter to the Vajrasana for the monastery in trust to Venerable Mangalasvaman of Lanka, master of the Tipitaka, by the king, son of Buddhasena, for as long as the sun and moon endure. The inscription ends with a rather un-Buddhist sentiment: whichever king of my dynasty, good, bad or worthless, violates this grant, may his father be an ass and his mother a sow. There is no record of exactly how or when Bodh Gaya was destroyed, but when Dharmasvaman visited he was told of a raid that had taken place sometime before his arrival. A female devotee had offered a beautiful emerald that had been made into eyes for the Buddha statue in the temple. It is told that the precious stone which had been inserted between the eyebrows of the statue emitted such light that formerly one was able to read at dusk. A Turuska, Turkic, i.e. Muslim, soldier, having placed a ladder, climbed up and pulled the stones out. They say that while coming down the ladder the soldier fell and the two eyes of the statue were broken into bits. The stone's brilliance, by which one could read, then grew dim. When Dharmasvaman arrived at Bodh Gaya in July 1234 CE, another attack was expected at any time and the few monks who had not yet fled were making preparations to protect the Buddha statue in the temple from the fury of the iconoclasts. At the time Dharmasvaman visited Vajrasana the place was deserted and only 4 monks were found staying there. One of them said, "It is not good. All have fled from fear of the Turuska soldiery." They blocked up the door in front of the Mahabodhi image with bricks and plastered it. Near it they placed another image as a substitute. They also plastered the outside door of the temple. On its surface they drew the image of Mahasvara in order to protect it from non-Buddhists. The monks said, "We 5 do not dare to remain here and shall have to flee." As the day was nearly past and the heat great, related Dharmasvaman, they felt tired, and as it became dark, they remained there and fell asleep. Had the Turuskas come they would not have known it. At daybreak they fled towards the north following a cart rut, and for 17 days Dharmasvaman did not see the face of the image in the temple. At that time also a woman appeared who brought the welcome news that the Turuska soldiery had gone far away. Then Dharmasvaman returned to Vajrasana and stayed there worshipping and circumambulating the image of Mahabodhi. After this, the Mahabodhi Temple fell into ruin, perhaps due to deliberate destruction, perhaps due to neglect, probably due to a combination of both, and evidence of pilgrims visiting becomes less and less. The temple itself became just one of many neglected ruins, the significance of which local people had forgotten. As the names of many cities and towns were changed after the Islamic invasion, simply finding where Bodh Gaya was would have been quite a task for a lone pilgrim coming from afar. But despite this, Bodh Gaya was never completely forgotten, especially by the Buddhists of Burma. The Sri Lankans had maintained the Mahabodhi Temple for 900 years during the time it functioned as a center of Buddhism. The Burmese attempted to take over this role after the temple was deserted, coming several times between the 13th and 19th centuries to repair the temple and save it from falling into utter ruins. In 1295 King Klawawa of Burma sent a mission to Bodh Gaya to repair the temple and make elaborate offerings at the Bodhi Tree. Other missions from Burma came in 1472 and 4 times between 1811 and 1877, which means that for about 600 years the continued existence of the Mahabodhi Temple was almost entirely due to the devotion and generosity of the Buddhists of Burma. Inscriptions found at Bodh Gaya dating from the 14th century show that despite the virtual destruction of Buddhism in India, small pockets of Buddhists in scattered parts of the subcontinent still clung to their religion. Between 1302 and 1331, several parties of pilgrims from the Sind came to Bodh Gaya and left reminders of their visits on the granite paving stones inside the temple. Sometime during the 15th or 16th centuries, a lonely pilgrim from what is believed to be Multan scratched a record of his visit on the old stone railing. So it seems that even amongst the overgrown and crumbling ruins, a few lone pilgrims could sometimes still be found paying their respects at this most sacred place. The last Indian Buddhist we know of to have visited Bodh Gaya, and very possibly one of the last monks in India, was Buddhagupta. Born in South India in the second half of the 15th century, this indefatigable monk had already visited Afghanistan. Kashmir, Ladakh, Sri Lanka, Java, Lakshadweep and even East Africa before he made his pilgrimage to Bodh Gaya. He seems to have spent some time at the deserted temple, meditating and performing pujas before setting off again on his travels. Next he visited Assam, Tibet, where the young Taranatha became his disciple, Burma and Lumpur in northern Thailand, and then finally he disappeared from history, leaving us to wonder where this great traveler ended up. Around the middle of the 16th century, a Nepalese pilgrim named Abhiraj arrived in Bodh Gaya, where he resided for several years. During his stay he made a careful plan of the Mahabodhi Temple and on his return used it to build a smaller replica of the original at Patan near Kathmandu. A little before 1773 the Panchen Lama sent 9 monks and 3 laymen led by Tung Rampa to Sarnath and Bodh Gaya. The Maharaja of Varanasi welcomed the Tibetans, gave them letters of introduction for their onward journey, palanquins and attendants, and they were able to reach Bodh Gaya in a fortnight. When the party, minus 3 monks who had succumbed to the Indian heat, returned to Tibet, the Maharaja sent an envoy with them to present gifts to the Panchen Lama. Among these presents were a watch, elephant tusks, and a small model of the Mahabodhi Temple. After that, the next time we hear of Buddhists coming to Bodh Gaya is in 1811 when a mission sent by King Bodawaya of Burma carried out repairs to the temple. At about this same time, a Burmese monk also visited, and as there was nowhere for him to stay, he was given accommodation in the Mahant's palace, where he had the distinction of converting one of the Hindu monks to Buddhism. Towards the end of the 19th century, when Anagarika Dharmapala claimed the Mahabodhi Temple for Buddhists, the Mahant insisted it belonged to him. However, all accounts of the temple prior to J.D. Biglar's restoration in 1880 indicate that it was an uncared for and neglected ruin. The second floor chamber and the first ground floor chamber had completely collapsed, the pinnacle was broken, and accumulated rubbish meant that the ground level around the temple came up to the niches on the outer walls. Visitors actually had to descend into the main shrine, and every rainy season it was filled with stagnant water. In 1877, Mindon, the last great Burmese king, sent yet another mission to Bodh Gaya, not merely to repair the temple but to build a monastery, provide accommodation for pilgrims, and employ workers to maintain the temple, in other words, to bring it once again to life. However, while the faith and determination of the king and the members of his mission may have been strong, their understanding of the importance of preserving the original character of the temple was not, and inadvertently, they did a great deal of damage. The temple was now widely recognized to be of enormous historical and architectural significance, and this prompted the British authorities to ask Alexander Cunningham and Rajendra Lalmitra to advise the Burmese mission on the work they were undertaking. When the Anglo-Burmese War broke out and the Burmese mission had to leave, the British finally decided to finish the work themselves. The repair of the temple, the cleaning up of the sacred precincts, and partial excavations were ably carried out by J.D. Beglar in close consultation with Cunningham, and all of the expenses, 1,000 rupees all told, were met by the government of India. Sadly, some of the choicest Buddha statues, stupas and other antiquities were shipped off to museums. While clearing the mountains of rubbish in the sacred precincts, a miniature model of the temple was found, and Beglar used this to justify adding the 4 corner pinnacles and the facade of the upstairs shrine, for which he was later much criticized. However, although these additions in their present form may not correspond exactly to how the temple originally looked, few can doubt that Beglar's restoration gave the temple back its majesty. Beglar understood that the Mahabodhi Temple was never meant to be a dead relic for students of archaeology and architecture to study, but a celebration in brick and stone of the Buddha's enlightenment and a proper temple where Buddhists could come and worship. Now that the physical structure of the temple was restored, the task of restoring the rights of Buddhists to worship there and control it began. Anagarika Dharmapala and the Mahant had become embroiled in illegal battles which hinged on who actually owned the temple, which in 1906 ended in defeat for Dharmapala, a conclusion which, though a bitter blow, only served to strengthen his resolve. During the remaining 27 years of his life, he ceaselessly agitated for his cause, having the issue brought before the Indian National Congress on 3 occasions, petitioning the government and mobilizing public opinion. In India, public opinion gradually moved in favor of Buddhist control, and eminent intellectuals and scholars began to speak out on the issue. Rabindranath Tagore, the only non-European until then to have won the Nobel Prize, put his support squarely behind Dharmapala. I am sure it will be admitted by all Hindus who are true to their own ideals that it is an intolerable wrong to allow the temple, raised on the spot where Lord Buddha attained his enlightenment, to remain under the control of a rival sect which can neither have an intimate knowledge of nor sympathy for the Buddhist religion and its rites of worship. I consider it to be a sacred duty of all individuals believing in freedom and justice to help to restore this historical site to the community of people who still reverently carry on that particular current of history in their own living faith. Even Mahatma Gandhi, a very orthodox Hindu, had to admit that the temple rightfully belonged to the Buddhists. There is no doubt that the possession of the temple should vest in the Buddhists. There may be legal difficulties. They must be overcome. If the report is true, that animal sacrifice is offered in the temple, it is a sacrilege. It is equally a sacrilege if the worship is offered, as it is alleged, in a way calculated to wound the susceptibilities of the Buddhist. Finally, in 1949 the Bodh Gaya Temple Act, Bihar Act 17-1949, amended February 8, 1955, was passed, making provision for the setting up of a committee of 4 Hindus and 4 Buddhists to manage the affairs of the temple. This arrangement was far from satisfactory, but was better than what had prevailed previously. Today, Bodh Gaya is a small but lively town that has grown up around the Mahabodhi Temple. In any week, an ambassador from a Buddhist country, a famous Buddhist scholar or meditation teacher will turn up. During the winter, at the height of the pilgrim season, one will see Indian Buddhists from Maharashtra, Ladakh, Bengal, or the tribal areas of Meghalaya or Manipur. One may see Vietnamese, Japanese, or Sinhalese, Thais or Malaysians. One will certainly see Tibetan refugees who have lived in India since 1959, and even a few whom the Chinese authorities have allowed to come on pilgrimage on condition that some members of the family stay behind to guarantee their return. There will be many Europeans, Americans and Australians, some who come out of curiosity, others out of devotion. This great variety of peoples from different cultures adds a fascinating dimension to Bodh Gaya's historical, artistic and spiritual significance, and makes it one of the most interesting destinations in India. What to see? Minden Min's Bell. The pilgrim enters the temple compound by the east gate and sees the spires of the temple rising up before him or her, and the sacred precincts spread out below. When the famous English novelist E.M. Forster came here, he said, "The view when one drives up and sees everything suddenly from the edge of the embankment is, as the books say, not easily forgotten. There can't be anything like it in the world." Descending the stairs and proceeding towards the temple, the pilgrim will see on the left a large bronze bell. The inscription on this bell says that it was especially cast by King Minden Min of Burma and taken to Bodh Gaya by the mission he sent there in 1877. The Gateway. Proceeding a little further, the pilgrim will pass under a beautifully carved gateway, Torana, marking the entrance into the sacred precinct. To judge by the style of the carvings on it, this gateway must date from about the 5th century CE. On the west side of the left pillar is an image of Jambala sitting under a wishing tree with a prosperity vase on one side and his consort on the other side. In his left hand he holds a bag of gold coins and in his right a lemon. On the south side of the same pillar are 2 deer flanking a Dhamma wheel. When Dharmasvaman visited the Bodh Gaya, this gateway was already broken, and he tells us that it had been erected by one Acharya Hayagosa. At the base of the gateway are 2 kneeling figures of Burmese workmanship, probably placed here during the Burmese mission's visit in 13th century. Buddhapata Temple. Just beyond the gateway and to the left is a small temple with a portico, the pillars of which are delicately carved. Under the portico is a large round stone carved with footprints of the type used in early centuries as a symbol of the Buddha. It was a stone like this that Dharmasvaman saw during his visit and about which he made some interesting comments. Formerly it was intended to build a chapel over the footprints, but learned pundits were of the opinion that if a chapel were built, it would require a door and a caretaker who would ask remuneration from worshippers, and the number of devotees worshipping the footprints would become less, and thus the chapel was not built. A short inscription on the side of this stone is dated 1308 CE, although the stone itself was carved many centuries earlier. Panchapanda temples. Beside the Buddhapada temple is a row of Hindu shrines built during the time when Bodh Gaya was neglected by Buddhists and used by Hindus. The first shrine contains an interesting collection of Buddha statues dating from the Pala period, now dressed up and painted to look like Hindu gods. There is also a fine statue of Tara. The presiding Brahmins will badger the pilgrim for donations. A few rupees is sufficient. Here as elsewhere at Bodh Gaya, worshippers are under no obligation to make a donation. The Mahabodhi Temple. The pilgrim now stands in front of the great Mahabodhi Temple, the most sacred and in many respects one of the most beautiful temples in the Buddhist world. The temple consists of a rectangular base with a chamber, garbha, a large inward-sloping spire, sikara, rising from its center, and 4 smaller spires at the corners. Though a part of the original temple, these smaller spires were removed in the late medieval period and added again during Biglar's restoration. The central spire is about 52 meters high and is crowned by an amalika, a flattened round form common to most Indian temples. Except for the 4 pillars on the portico, the door frames, steps, and floor, the whole temple is made out of brick. The bricks in the oldest part of the temple measure 48 by 33 by 5 centimeters, and are so well made and fit together so closely that almost no cement had to be used to hold them together. The obvious care taken in building the temple and molding the bricks is undoubtedly one of the reasons it has survived the numerous earthquakes that have rocked the region over the centuries. In Huyen Tsiang's time, the 2 niches on either side of the main entrance held statues of Avalokitesvara and Maitreya made of silver, but now hold Buddha statues placed there during the temple's restoration. The crowned Buddha on the left has 2 smaller Buddhas at its shoulders, while the Bodhisattvas Padmapani and Avalokitesvara stand at its side. The Buddha in the niche on the right is particularly beautiful. Stylistically, it represents the transition from the Gupta to the Pala style and dates from the 7th century CE. Both Buddhas stand serenely on lotuses that rise above the jagged rocks and swirling waves of samsara. On entering the portico, 2 more Buddha statues will be seen on both the left and right. Once inside the first chamber, the pilgrim will notice that some of the large granite slabs on the floor have crudely executed carvings of crouching male and female figures with hands in the Anjali gesture, some holding lotus buds and worshipping stupas. There are also several inscriptions. All of these record pilgrimages made to Bodh Gaya by groups of princes and chiefs from Sind together with their wives between 1302 and 1331. Leaving the chamber, the pilgrim now enters a large barrel-vaulted room, at the end of which is the main shrine. This shrine is built on the very place where the Buddha attained enlightenment, the place variously called the Diamond Throne, the Victory Throne of all Buddhas, or the Navel of the Earth. 5. It was while seated here that vision arose, knowledge arose, wisdom arose, understanding arose, light arose in the Buddha that full moon night in 527 BCE, and where he continued to sit for 7 days experiencing the joy of liberation. The shrine on which the Buddha statue sits dates from the early Pala period. When Cunningham removed the stone slabs of this shrine, he found, to his surprise, an earlier smaller one inside. This second shrine had a plaster facing which when analyzed was found to be made up of lime mixed with tiny grains of coral, sapphire, crystal, pearl and ivory. A ball of clay was also found which, when broken, yielded a large number of gold objects, flowers, discs, and beads, precious and semi-precious stones, and an impression in thin gold of a coin dating from about 160 CE, indicating that this second shrine may have been erected around that time. Further investigation revealed a third shrine with what is thought to be the original Vajrasana on it. Consisting of a broken, highly polished, plain sandstone slab resting on a pedestal with 4 pilasters on its front, this Vajrasana closely resembled the Vajrasana represented in the Bharhut relief. There is little doubt this Vajrasana is a part of the original temple built by King Asoka in the 2 RD century BCE, though the polished sandstone slab may well be earlier still. The erecting of new shrines without the demolition of earlier ones and the treasures found therein is evidence of the enormous reverence with which this sacred spot has been held over the centuries. The statue originally placed on the Vajrasana was called the Mahabodhi image and was the most famous statue in the ancient world. In Huiyan Xiang's time, this chamber was so dark, probably due to a wooden pavilion at the entrance, that the features of the Mahabodhi image could only be seen by reflecting light inside with the use of a great mirror. He also tells of an interesting incident that occurred sometime before his visit. King Sasanka, having cut down the Bodhi tree, wished to destroy this image, but having seen its loving features, his mind had no rest or determination, and he returned with his retinue homeward. On the way, he said to one of his officers, "We must remove this statue of Buddha and place there a figure of Mahasvara." The officer, having received the order, was moved with fear, and sighing, said, "If I destroy the figure of Buddha, then during successive kalpas I will reap misfortune. If I disobey the king, he will put me to a cruel death and destroy my family. In either case, whether I obey or disobey, such will be the consequences. What, then, shall I do?" At this point, he called to his presence a man with a believing heart, a Buddhist, to help him, and set him to build across the chamber and in front of the statue a wall. The man, from a feeling of shame at the darkness, placed a burning lamp in with the statue, then drew a figure of Mahasvara on the wall. The work being finished, he reported the matter. On hearing it, the king was seized with terror, his body produced sores and his flesh rotted off, and after a short while he died. Then the officer quickly ordered the intervening wall to be pulled down, and when this was done the lamp was found to be still burning even though several days had elapsed. During Dharmasvaman's time, the statue was apparently easier to see. The face of the Mahabodhi image in the temple is 2 cubits in height. One is never satiated beholding such an image and has no desire to go and behold another. Dharmasvaman also said that even people with little faith, when standing in front of the image, felt it impossible not to shed tears. However, the Mahabodhi image was destroyed long ago, probably during the Islamic invasion. The statue we see today was found in the Mahant's compound and moved to its present position by Joseph Beglar. Dating from the late 10th century, this statue is more than 2 meters high and shows the Buddha in the earth-touching gesture, and it sits on a patterned cushion instead of the usual lotus. The pedestal below shows Pathavi, the earth goddess, flanked by 2 elephants and 2 lions. Although this Buddha statue is not particularly impressive, the environment in which it is observed gives it a definite appeal. When Rabindranath Tagore saw it, it is said that it was the only time in his life when he felt the urge to bow before an image. Returning to the first chamber, the pilgrim should climb the stairwell on the proper left leading up to the terrace. At the top of the stairwell is a large standing crowned Buddha flanked by 2 smaller Buddhas, the one on the right subduing the elephant Nalajairai. On either side of the main figure are beautifully carved leogryphs mounted on elephants. Stepping out onto the upper terrace, the pilgrim will notice to the right a door leading to a chamber directly above the main entrance of the temple. This upper chamber is only open in the evenings. Inside is an exceptionally beautiful standing Buddha from the Pala period crowned and bejeweled. Smaller Buddhas, 2 standing and 2 sitting, can be seen on either side of the main figure, while 2 devotees bow at its feet. The 2 figures on the pedestal are Pathavi, the earth goddess, and Kama, the Hindu god of erotic love. Like Cupid, his counterpart in Greek mythology, Kama uses a bow and arrows to smite his victims. Here, Kama sits dejected, his bow and arrow abandoned beside him, having been defeated by the Buddha's teaching of calm detachment. The statue has recently been gilded, adding considerably to its beauty. Leaving the upper chamber and proceeding around the terrace, keeping the temple's main spire to one's right, the pilgrim can walk around the temple, passing the two smaller pinnacles at the back of the temple and passing above the Bodhi tree. Each of these pinnacles has a Pala period Buddha statue in them. On the right side of the statue in the northwestern pinnacle is a small figure of a monk holding a begging bowl and a staff. Such staffs were used by monks while traveling or on pilgrimage. The iron ring on the top made a jingling sound that gave the staff its name, kakaraka. Arriving at the northeast corner of the temple, the pilgrim should enter the stairwell and descend once again to the ground floor. At the top of this stairwell is a large attractive standing Buddha statue of some interest. This statue has its hands in the gesture of bestowing blessings and is flanked by Avalokitesvara on the left and Maitreya on the right. It also has several inscriptions on it. The one on the bottom right, which indicates that it was donated by a monk from what is now Bangladesh, reads, "The gift of the senior monk, Virendra, well versed in the Vinaya and a resident of the great monastery of Somapura, an inhabitant of Samatada country, Bengal, and a follower of the excellent Mahayana school." The small figure beside the inscription is probably a portrait of Virendra. Going out through the main entrance and turning right, the pilgrim can walk around the outside of the temple. The outer walls have niches in them containing statues of the Buddha and various bodhisattvas, some of them ancient, others recent. Below each niche is a panel showing pairs of birds either holding a string of pearls in their beaks or with their heads turned away from each other. The pillars separating each panel have either floral designs or makaras, once again with strings of pearls in their mouths. Huyen Xiang mentions seeing all this stucco work, though it has been very much repaired since that time. He also says that at that time all the Buddha statues in the niches were gilded. The Bodhi Tree. At the back of the Mahabodhi Temple is the Bodhi Tree. On the night the Buddha attained enlightenment, he sheltered under the branches of such a tree. This variety of fig is called Bodhi Rucca by Buddhists and Ficus religiosa by botanists. The present Bodhi tree was planted in the 19th century, several previous trees having died or been destroyed. Legend says that before Asoka became a Buddhist he had the Bodhi tree cut down, but it miraculously sprouted again. The legend also says that after his conversion, Asoka became so devoted to the tree that his queen Tisharakshita got jealous and had it killed, after which it again miraculously regrew. There is some historical basis for the story that King Asoka's daughter, Sanghamitta, took a branch from the Bodhi tree to Sri Lanka. The tree that grew from that branch is still believed to still grow in the ancient Sri Lankan capital at Anuradhapura. History also tells us that King Sasanka destroyed the Bodhi tree during the time he persecuted Buddhists around 600 CE. Huyen Xiang says that every Vaisakha, thousands of people from all over India would gather at Bodh Gaya and bathe the roots of the tree with scented water and perfumed milk, play music, and scatter heaps of flowers. Dharmasvaman noticed similar expressions of devotion. The tree stands inside a fort-like structure surrounded on the south, west, and north by a brick wall. It has pointed leaves of bright green color. Having opened a door, one sees a large trench the shape of a basin. The devotees worship the tree with curd, milk, and perfumes such as sandalwood, camphor, and so on. They bring offerings from afar and keep it constantly moist. The Bodhi tree originally grew directly behind the Vajrasana, a little further to the east of its present position, but was replanted where the present tree grows when the Mahabodhi Temple was built. The present Bodhi tree was planted in the 19th century and is probably a distant descendant of the original one. Writing in 1892, Cunningham said, "In December 1862 I found this tree very much decayed. One large stem to the westward, with 3 branches, was still green, but the other branches were barkless and rotten. I next saw the tree in 1871, and again in 1875, when it had become completely decayed, and shortly afterwards in 1876, the only remaining portion of the tree fell over the west wall during a storm, and the old peepal tree was gone. Many seeds, however, had been collected, and young scions of the present tree were already in existence to take its place. In 1880, Cunningham dug near the new tree, and at a depth of about a meter, he found 2 pieces of very old wood which he believed were the remains of the Bodhi tree destroyed by King Sasanka. Incorporated into the new railing that surrounds the Bodhi tree is a part of the ancient enclosure. It consists of a carved stone frame and below it a long stone with carvings of elephants, lions, horses, a figure with a sword at one end and a devotee offering a bowl at the other. The carvings are badly worn and may date from the late Gupta period. The outer Vajrasana. At the foot of the Bodhi tree is the oldest object that can still be viewed at Bodh Gaya, a large rectangular slab of stone. This stone may have originally been placed over the Vajrasana inside the temple. This outer Vajrasana is 143 x 238 x 13.5 centimeters and made from polished Shinar sandstone. The top is decorated with unusual geometrical designs, and there is a palmette and goose frieze around the edge. Because of its migratory habits, the wild goose, Hamsa, was used in ancient Buddhism as a symbol of detachment. The Vajrasana was probably made by King Asoka, and the fact that a similar palmette and goose design is to be found on his pillar capital at Sanchi strengthens this conjecture. Ratnakankama Chaitya. Leaving the Bodhi tree and continuing around the temple, the pilgrim comes to Ratnakankama Chaitya, the jewel promenade shrine. 6. This structure marks the place where the Buddha walked up and down in the 3rd week after his enlightenment, and along with the Vajrasana, the Bodhi tree and the railing, formed a part of the earliest temple at Bodh Gaya. The Ratnakankama Chaitya originally consisted of a long brick plinth with a row of 11 pillars on either side supporting a roof above the plinth. Today the plinth has been encased in stone, and only the base of one row of pillars can be seen, the other row being buried under the north wall of the Mahabodhi Temple. One of the original pillars has also survived and can still be seen in the Archaeological Museum. The shaft of the pillar is octagonal and has a graceful female figure carved on it. Letters carved on the pillar bases, probably mason's marks, indicate that they date from about 100 BCE. The railing. The pilgrim will have noticed that the Mahabodhi Temple is surrounded by a railing. The first railing must have been made of wood and would have enclosed an area much smaller than the present railing. In about 100 BCE, a stone railing replaced the original one. Parts of this old stone railing still survive, and the inscriptions on it indicate that it was the gift of a group of women with royal connections. This old railing formed a quadrangle, a little smaller than the area occupied by the present Mahabodhi Temple, and indeed, Cunningham found the remains of the plinth that the railing originally stood on under the foundations of the temple. Sometime in about the 6th century CE. This old stone railing was dismantled, new stones were added, and it was rebuilt to enclose an area almost twice as large as before. The difference between the old and new railing is clear from the stone used. The earlier is made of a smooth brown sandstone, while the latter is made of a gray, rather coarse granite. Today, only 7 railing pillars are still in their original position, the rest having been removed to the Archaeological Museum and replaced by rather crude cement casts of the originals. The remaining pillars are numbers 4, 7, and 9 from the southwest corner on the west side, numbers 12 and 14 from the southwest corner on the south side, and the 2 gate pillars on the north side. 2 of these pillars, number 4, west side, and number 12, south side, have interesting carvings on them. The first shows a man controlling an elephant, perhaps an illustration of Dhammapada. v. 326. Formerly this mind wandered as it liked, where it wished and according to its pleasure. but now I will master it with wisdom. As a mahout controls an elephant with a hook. The second has what is believed to be a representation of the apsidal temple at Sarnath on its outer side. We will discuss the other carvings on the railing in the section on the Archaeological Museum. By the 19th century, much of the railing had disappeared, and what survived either lay buried under rubbish or was incorporated into the walls of the Hindu temples to the left of the main entrance of the Mahabodhi Temple. Votive stupas. Outside the railing, the pilgrim will notice hundreds of votive stupas in and around the gardens. The undecorated stupas with the hemispherical domes are earlier than the elaborately carved stupas with the flat-topped domes, which date from the Pala period. Some of the more beautifully carved of these later stupas can be seen along the inside of the eastern side of the railing. In the 19th century, there were also hundreds of thousands of small clay stupas and votive tablets found around the temple, but they have all now disappeared. Several of these plaques have been found at Pagan and Pagu in Burma, and Major RC Temple, commenting on these discoveries, says there was a factory for such objects at Bodh Gaya for the pilgrims, who took them hence all over the Buddhist world of the time as keepsakes and relics, and presented them to their own places of worship on their return home. Directly south of the Mahabodhi Temple are the foundations of the biggest stupa ever built at Bodh Gaya. According to Huiyan Xiang, this stupa was originally 60 meters high and was built by King Asoka. Ratnagara. In the northwest corner of the gardens round the temple is the Ratnagara, the jewel house shrine, of which only the walls survive. The original shrine here was said to have been built for the Buddha by the devas, and the Buddha spent the 4th week after his enlightenment here contemplating the Abhidhamma. 7. The original stone doorframe, with elaborate though much worn carvings on it, is still intact and dates from the 9th century. Inside are fragments of ancient statues. Anamisa Chaitya. To the right of the path leading to the main entrance of the temple and on the top of the embankment, is a temple with a single spire, similar to that on the Mahabodhi Temple. Inside the temple is a particularly beautiful statue of Avalokitesvara Siddhattha holding a lotus in his left hand and with a lion at his right side. The statue dates from the Pala period but is in a style distinctly different from most statues from this time. Perhaps it was made in another part of India and was carried to Bodh Gaya by a pilgrim. This temple is usually known as the Anamisa Chaitya, the unblinking shrine, and is said to mark the place where the Buddha sat for 7 days staring without blinking at the Bodhi tree out of gratitude for the shelter it had given him. 8. However, this identification is almost certainly wrong as this temple sits on the top of the mound indicating its late date and it is facing away from rather than towards the Bodhi tree. The Jataka says the Anamisa Chaitya was directly north of the Vajrasana. This is confirmed by Huiyan Xiang, who said it was on the left side of the road, to the north of the place where the Buddha walked, that is, north of the Ratnakankama shrine. If this is so, the Anamisa shrine must be represented by the foundations of the large structure a little beyond the gate on the northern side of the railing and on which Tibetan monks often do prostrations. It will be noticed that a statue placed in this structure would have looked exactly at where the Bodhi tree originally stood, just a little behind the Vajrasana. Inside the Mahabodhi Temple. At the northwest corner of the Anamisa Chaitya is a line of statues, the middle one being of Avalokitesvara. This fine statue depicts the Bodhisattva of compassion with 4 arms, the upper left and right ones holding a lotus and a mala respectively, the lower left one holding a water pot and the right one in the gesture of bestowing blessings. Shrine and Buddha statue. A short distance northwest of the Bodhi tree is a small shrine now with only its lower walls still intact. Inside this shrine is a superb example of Pala period sculpture. The statue, over a meter high and dating from 9th century, depicts the Buddha in the earth-touching gesture. Above him is an umbrella and the spreading branches of the Bodhi tree, and to the left and right are jubilant devas offering garlands. Behind the Buddha is an elaborate halo and throne flanked on either side by images of Maitreya and Avalokitesvara. The benignly smiling Buddha sits on a lotus below which are several pedestals brought from elsewhere and cemented here. The pedestal in the center depicts the 7 treasures or accoutrements of the universal statesman, Kakavati, the secular equivalent of a Buddha as mentioned in the Kakavati Sihanata Sutta. These treasures are, from the left, the horse, the jewel, the consort, the wheel, the minister, the citizen, and the elephant. Southeast Shrine. After his enlightenment, the Buddha had reservations about teaching the Dhamma, thinking that few would be able to understand his message. Then Brahma appeared before him, urging him to change his mind. Let the Lord teach the Dhamma, let the happy one expound the Dhamma. There are beings with but little dust in their eyes who, if they do not hear the Dhamma, will decline, while if they do they will grow. The Buddha considered Brahma's pleas and decided that he would, after all, teach anyone who would listen and who could understand, proclaiming, "Open are the doors of the deathless. Let all who can hear respond with faith." 9. Huiyan Tsiang saw a shrine built at the place where this incident took place, and the remains of it now lie in the southeast corner of the sacred precincts around the temple. Only the foundations of this shrine remain, and the large Buddha statue within dates from the Pala period, though its head is a recent restoration. Pillar. Just beyond the southeast corner of the sacred precincts of the temple is a section of a huge pillar. The Bharhut relief and the Kumarar plaque both indicate that one of Asoka's pillars crowned with an elephant capital originally stood just outside the temple railing to the right of its east gateway. However, neither Fa Hian nor Huiyan Tsiang mention seeing the pillar, which suggests that it must have been either destroyed or moved to another location by that time. The pillar that the pilgrim now sees was found at next to the stupa across the river from Bodh Gaya, was moved to Geolpathar in Gaya at the beginning of the 19th century and then moved to its present location in 1956. It may be a segment of the pillar originally erected by King Asoka at Bodh Gaya, but this is not certain. Tank. Walking through the pavilion just south of the pillar, the pilgrim will see a large tank which at certain times of the year is filled with the blossoms of beautiful lotuses and water lilies. This tank was excavated in the process of making bricks for the Mahabodhi Temple and other buildings, and later doubled as a place for bathing. Even at the end of the 19th century there were crocodiles in the tank. This tank is often mistaken for the Mukalinda tank, a misunderstanding not helped by the sign nearby or the recent erection of a statue of the Buddha sheltered by Mukalinda in the middle of the tank. The real Mukalinda tank is actually a shallow muddy pool about 1.5 kilometers further south, in the village of Mukulin. 10. Archaeological Museum. As many of the sculptures from Bodh Gaya were either taken to museums during the 19th century or simply disappeared, the Archaeological Museum has only a small collection. The most important exhibit is the stone railing that once surrounded the Mahabodhi Temple, most of it reassembled in the museum. The meaning of the carvings on the railing has given rise to much speculation. Benamadhab Barua has suggested, in most cases rather unconvincingly, that many of the carvings represent zodiacal signs. In fact, the carvings seem to be illustrations of famous Buddhist shrines, events in the life of the Buddha and from the Jataka, scenes from daily life, auspicious symbols, and in some cases, representations of popular Hindu deities and zodiacal signs, composed in no particular order. Some of the more clearly recognizable carvings on the railing in the courtyard include 1. An ascetic in a cave, 2. A winged deer, 3. An ascetic in a hut with a lion, 4. A man with a horse-headed female, 5. 2 men playing chess on a board with 64 squares, 6. A woman and child listening to a goat or deer, perhaps illustrating the Rohanatamaga Jataka, 7. A winged elephant, 8. A mermaid. Along the coping stone is a line of mermaids reaching into the mouths of sea monsters, a procession of mythological beasts and floral designs. The carvings on the railing inside the museum include 1. Two figures worshipping at the Indusala cave, 2. Loving couples, 3. A Bodhi tree surrounded by a railing, 4. A centaur, perhaps Thanu, the Indian Sagittarius, 5. 3 elephants worshipping the Bodhi tree, 6. Men in a boat picking lotuses, perhaps illustrating Sutta Nipata v.2, 7. The Hindu goddess Gaja Lakshmi. 8. A temple enshrining a Dhamma wheel, 9. The purchase of the Jetavana by Anathapindika, 10. A winged horse, 11. A winged man riding on a sea monster, 12. A warrior carrying a sword and shield. On most of the crossbars are lotus medallions, sometimes with human heads or animals in their centers. The museum is open from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and closed on Fridays. Modern temples and monasteries. Many Buddhist countries and sects of Buddhism have built temples at Bodh Gaya, often in their particular traditional styles, giving this small Indian town an unusual international flavor. The oldest of these buildings is the Mahabodhi rest house built by Anagarika Dharmapala at the turn of the 20th century. Right next to it is a Tibetan temple of the Gelugpa sect. The walls of this temple are painted in Tibetan style with scenes from the Buddha's life and pictures of the great pundits of the Indian Mahayana and the Tibetan Vajrasana schools. On the shrine is a beautiful statue of Maitreya. Down the road is the fine new temple of the Nyingapa sect of Tibetan Buddhism, the Chinese temple, and beyond it, the temple of Darjeeling's Buddhist community. A little beyond this is what Bodh Gaya, built by the King of Thailand in the 1950s. Turning the corner and proceeding further, the pilgrim will come to the brightly painted Bhutanese temple. Across the road and down a little is a temple of the Kagyu sect of Tibetan Buddhism. Beyond this are 2 Japanese temples, and at the end of the road is a 24-meter-high statue of the Buddha carved out of pink sandstone. On the other side of town beside the old road to Gaya, just beyond the Mahants Monastery, is the Burmese monastery with its recently rebuilt temple. The Mahants Monastery. This large walled monastery, running for some distance along the bank of the river, is the residence of the Mahant. Although supposedly the home of a religious ascetic, the place has the atmosphere of a barnyard with geese, chickens, and cows wandering about and tractors coming and going. The monastery was built gradually during the period when there were no Buddhists at Bodh Gaya, and as the builders have incorporated a number of Buddhist sculptures into the structure, it is of some interest to the Buddhist. In niches on either side of the main gate leading into the palace compound are 3 small but beautifully carved Buddha statues. The one on the left has recently had its head broken off. Entering the main gate, proceeding some distance and passing through the first gate on the right, the pilgrim will enter a large walled vegetable garden. At the far end of this garden are 2 Burmese-style pavilions. The first of these houses the inscription set up by the mission sent to repair the Mahabodhi Temple by King Mindon Min, written in both Devanagari and Burmese scripts. The inscription is carved on a smooth creamy white marble slab. The second pavilion had a painting on its walls, possibly depicting the Burmese mission worshipping the temple, but sadly, this painting has recently been whitewashed over. Retracing one's steps back through the gateway, the pilgrim should now enter the monastery itself. In the courtyard is the Mahant's throne with its moth-eaten tiger skin, and just behind it, cemented into the walls, are several Buddhist sculptures. The most interesting of these is the one of Avalokitesvara Siddhattha riding on a lion and holding a trident. The presiding Brahmins will expect money, a few rupees is quite sufficient. Leaving the palace by the main entrance and turning left, the pilgrim will see a group of spired temples built around a courtyard. Until recently this courtyard housed 14 large Buddha statues, but most these were recently stolen. At the far end of the courtyard is a large stone with the Buddha's footprints on it, and several stupas. The pilgrim should now return to the main compound and leave by the east gate that leads to the river. In a sunken niche on the right of the gate is a statue of the tantric deity Chunda, one of the most impressive images still to be seen around Bodh Gaya. Mukhalinda tank. The Buddha spent a week at Bodh Gaya sitting at the foot of a Mukalinda tree, Pterospermum acerifolium. While there a great rainstorm began and the Naga Mukalinda curled itself around the Buddha 7 times and opened its hood over him, saying, "Let not cold or heat, the touch of flies or mosquitoes, wind or heat or creeping things disturb the Lord." 11. This tree disappeared centuries ago, but the tank on whose banks it grew is still there. To get there, take the road that goes through Bodh Gaya's market and which runs parallel to the river and follow it south for about 1.5 kilometers to the village of Mukalin. At one point the pilgrim will have to walk through cultivated fields. Be careful not to tread down the crops. The Mukalinda tank is on the edge of the village and is filled with dark water and surrounded by palm trees and stands of bamboo. On the west side of the tank is a small Hindu temple enshrining several small stupas now being worshipped at Shiva lingams. The Mukalinda tank is worth seeing because of its association with the Buddha, but as it is in a completely rural setting, it is also of interest to those who would like to see something of Indian village life. Naranjara River. Perhaps the most attractive natural landmark around Bodh Gaya is the Naranjara River, now called Nilajan or sometimes Lilajan. Wide, sandy and shallow even in the rainy season, the river is a pleasant place to sit beside or walk along in the cool of the late afternoon. The Buddha bathed in the Naranjara several times during his stay at Bodh Gaya. The ancient commentary says that the Naranjara derived its name from the words pleasant, Neelam, or alternatively blue, Nila, and water, Jalam. It also describes the river as flowing with pure, blue and cool water, a description that still holds good even though parts of the river are used as a toilet by the local people. A few kilometers downstream from Bodh Gaya, the Naranjara meets the Mohana to form the Falgu River, which flows past Gaya and which is considered sacred by Hindus. Stupa. Directly across the river from Bodh Gaya and surrounded by a village is a grassy mound, the remains of an ancient stupa. Huyen Tsiang was told that this stupa was built to mark the location of events in one of the Buddha's former lives as told in the Matapasaka Jataka. 12. Excavations done in the 1970s indicated that it was first built in the late Gupta period, repaired several times, and finally enlarged by the Pala king Devapaladeva in the 9th century. This is confirmed by an inscription found during excavation that read Sujatta's abode is built by King Devapala and indicates that at that time the place was believed to be the site of Sujatta's house. According to legend, as the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree just before his enlightenment, the young woman Sujatta offered him a bowl of milk rice which gave him the strength he needed to his final struggle. Until the beginning of the 19th, this stupa was relatively complete until an Englishman named Badam removed huge amounts of bricks from it for a house he was building in Gaya. During the digging, a stone box was found which contained fragments of bone and numerous small images. Badam also uncovered a large stone pillar which he had dragged to Gaya and erected. In 1956 this pillar was returned to Bodh Gaya. In the last few years, local people have began claiming that several other locations beyond the stupa are the site of events in the Buddha's life. All these claims are spurious, of recent origin and made only in the hope of getting donations from pilgrims. How to get there? Bodh Gaya is 12 kilometers from Gaya, and is easily reached by bus or rickshaw. See the chapter on Gaya. A new international airport has just been opened at Gaya, so it is now possible fly to Bodh Gaya directly from Bangkok. Around Bodh Gaya. Pragbodhi. In the Mahasakaka Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha gives a vivid description of the terrible austerities he practiced in the 6 years before his enlightenment, but as to where he stayed during this period he gives no hint. 13. It is very likely that he stayed around Rajagaha and later around Gaya. In Huyen Tsiang's time, tradition said that the Bodhisattva stayed in a cave on the side of a mountain called Pragbodhi, prior to enlightenment, before finally deciding to go to Bodh Gaya, and there is no reason to doubt this tradition. Pragbodhi, now called Dunswara, is situated about 6.5 kilometers to the northeast of Bodh Gaya. The mountain itself is a part of a chain of peaks extending in a north-south direction for about 6 kilometers. Halfway up the mountain at the base of a steep cliff is a small temple maintained by several friendly Tibetan monks. Just above the temple is a small cave in which, tradition says, the Bodhisattva took shelter. Taking the rough path from the temple to the top of Pragbodhi, the pilgrim is rewarded with a magnificent view across the countryside. The peak is rugged and treeless, and the vultures soaring above only seem to emphasize the silence. Below, the pilgrim will see the foundations of a large monastic complex and on the top of the mountain, the ruins of several ancient stupas. The peaceful environment around Pragbodhi, its wild beauty and the powerful presence that can be felt in the cave, make it well worth a visit. How to get there? Take a rickshaw or bus from Bodh Gaya along the old Gaya road that follows the river to the village of Kiriyama. The village is situated where the second line of pylons crosses the river. Walk across the river and proceed through the paddy fields towards the mountain. Recently a road has been built to Pragbodhi and it is now possible to go all the road by vehicle. Vehicles can be hired in Bodh Gaya. Coke. The Mahabodhi Temple is one of the few ancient structures in northern India to survive as anything more than foundations. Another temple that has survived fairly complete is to be seen at Coke. Built perhaps several centuries after the Mahabodhi Temple, it resembles it in some ways except that it is smaller. It has no square base and the sides of its tower, Sikara, are curved rather than straight. It originally had a hall at its entrance and the stone pillars that supported this hall can still be seen lying around. In the modern hall that has replaced the ancient one is a large and interesting collection of ancient Hindu images. As these are still worshipped by the locals, the visitor should regard them as sacred and treat them appropriately. It is possible that the Coke temple was originally a Buddhist one, but it is more likely that there was once a Buddhist temple nearby. Whatever the case, outside the temple there are several statues of the Buddha and of bodhisattvas, nearly all with their heads broken off. How to get there? Highway 7 runs northwest from Gaya to Coke, a distance of 32 kilometers. The road is reasonably good but unsafe after dark.